I was basically hemorrhaging. I was bleeding to death. But I was like, I'm calm about it because I know if this is the last moment that I'm gonna have with my son, he's not about to be left with no safety net. I have the estate plan in place. I have the life insurance.
How often should someone review the estate plan to make sure that they're always fully buttoned up and protected? Today, I'm joined by Shirley Diaz, an estate planning attorney whose career spans from Goldman Sachs to Big Law to now a founder of a boutique estate planning firm that helps new families plan for the future. And estate planning is so broad, and it can mean different things to different people, right? And so, you know, being that you and I are always connecting with high performers, successful professionals, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about estate planning?
The number one request that I get is I want a simple will. Everyone thinks that their estate is simple, and everyone thinks that all they need is a will. And I get that because that's what you hear in the popular media is like, you have to have a will. And I would say for most people who are professionals accumulating assets and anyone who has a financial dependent, doesn't even mean that you have kids. Your spouse might depend on your income to pay the mortgage and the bills and to maintain their lifestyle. So anyone who has a financial dependent and anyone who is accumulating significant assets, they probably also need a trust, or a variety of trusts, depending on their tax situation. So I won't even do a will-based plan for a family that has a child under 18.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. Namely, the purpose of the plan when the couple is younger, you know, we're not talking about end of life, we're talking about couple just had a baby. They want to do the estate plan because they want to account for the like what happens to the baby or to the child if the parents are in an accident and pass away. Right. And so if that's really the goal of the estate plan, or if that's one of the purposes that it will serve, the will-based plan is not enough. And I'll break it down why. First and foremost, a child can't receive an inheritance if they're under 18. Mm-hmm. So if all you have is a will, a judge is going to have to appoint a guardian of the estate of the child. And that person is the one who's going to receive the money and manage it until the day the child turns 18. Right. And then the child gets everything that's left right away.
People are always asking for the simple stuff. Like people want to take the cheapest way out. Hey, what's the cheapest? You know, because I'm assuming a simple will or a will-based estate plan is cheaper than a trust-based estate plan.
Absolutely, it is. And I would say a will-based plan, it depends on your state. In some states, a will-based plan might be a fine idea, but in most states, it probably isn't. I would say a will-based plan is good for someone who just turned 18 and who is still in college or early career. But once you get sort of past 30 for sure, and you're, you know, accumulating assets, like it's time to, if you only have a will-based plan, it's time to redo, or if you literally are starting from scratch, it's probably time to do a trust-based plan.
How often should someone review the estate plan to make sure that they're always fully buttoned up and protected?
Just think about your life, right? So you turn 18, in that moment, your parents can no longer get your medical record. So if you're in college, make sure that you have your healthcare directives and your healthcare powers of attorney so that if anything ever happens to you, like there's someone who can take a decision on your behalf and pay your bills. So that would be like kind of the first thing. The next thing I would say is if you're going to get married, everyone knows to get a prenup done. I don't know if people actually do it or not, but if you're getting a prenup done already, that's a good time to get an estate plan done as a couple, because that way, as soon as the marriage starts, you already have the family trust set up. So anytime you buy like real estate or, you know, if you have a joint checking account, joint savings account, joint whatever, like those can all already start off titled to the trust from the beginning. If you're accepting a child, definitely anytime you have a financial dependent, get the estate plan done either before you get the financial dependent or soon thereafter. Starting a business is another big one. A lot of people forget that if they're in business, especially if you're in business with a business partner, if you or your business partner passes away, your business interest will pass on to your heirs, like your partner too. It'll pass on to their heirs. So you may end up in business with your business partner's spouse or child or other heir, and that might not be what you wanted. So you have to have a business continuity plan. And so anytime you start a business, you need to have an estate plan so it's clear, what's going to happen to the business if the owner or one of the owners passes away. And then when we get like later in life too, you might grow out of touch with someone you might have named as a successor trustee or as a future guardian of your kids. So that would be a great reason to change that too. You know, I think typically there's like a prescription of like every 3 to 5 years, but I don't think counting it by years makes sense, because there could be easily a situation where you have kids, you do your estate plan, everyone that you named, you're still in great contact with. The kids are now 10 years old. You haven't started a business. You're kind of just, everything's the same. Then everything's fine. So I would really measure it by like, does the plan still make sense? And then later in life, we have to take into account Medicaid planning. And I don't know if your audience is in late life, but they can think about this for their parents, that Medicaid will look 5 years back at your assets. And if you have more than $2,000 in assets, which is like, basically zero for I think most of the people listening to your podcast, then you don't qualify. And you have to do the private care, which is very expensive. So we see many people coming in to get the assets out of their estate and putting it in an irrevocable plan. So that way, when there's the 5-year look back, they can say there's only $2,000 in assets.
I remember when we were prepping for the podcast, I was asking about like your experience of your personal estate plan.
Yeah.
Talk us through like when you got your stuff set up.
So I did my estate plan before going to the hospital. I was in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy with my son. Okay. In fact, I think I was due in like 2 weeks, which is like the worst time to do it because you're so stressed that like it's like 2 weeks out. So I would suggest if you're expecting, plan to do your estate plan. I think the 3rd trimester is fine, but maybe do it earlier and not 2 weeks before your due date. Anyway, I did it 2 weeks before my due date, and I made a trust-based plan. I named my guardians. I did my guardian elections. I named my successor trustees. I got life insurance, and that would pay out to the trust if anything happened to me, because labor is very unexpected. It's it's something that, thankfully in the United States, we have a low maternal mortality rate, but it could happen. Yeah. And also because I'm a single mother by choice, there is not another parent who would take custody immediately or financial responsibility. So I, in particular, definitely needed to have an estate plan in place. And the story with the hospital is, once I go to the hospital for labor, and I was induced, by the way, so it was a scheduled induction. So I knew I was going into labor those days. And I was given advice not to accept Pitocin. This is going really into details, but typically right after the baby and the placenta are delivered, it's common practice for the mother to be given Pitocin because it stops, the bleeding.
Got it. Okay.
I was told to reject the Pitocin because the hormones spike and then valley tends to increase the chances of having postpartum depression.
Wow.
And so I rejected the Pitocin, but I ended up having heavy bleeding, and they were really worried about me. I was basically hemorrhaging. I was bleeding to death. And so ultimately, after them trying a variety of different solutions, they said, you're going to need the Pitocin. And so then I, ultimately did agree to get the Pitocin, and then, ultimately they were able to get me under control. But while that was all happening, again, this is after the baby's delivered. So I have baby on my chest, and I'm like, trying to connect with him. And I knew that all of this stuff was happening in the background. Like I knew I was bleeding to death basically, but I was like, I'm calm about it because I know if this is the last moment that I'm going to have with my son, like he's not about to be left, with no safety net. Like I have the estate plan in place. I have the life insurance. Like I planned for the possibility of this happening. So I'm going to ignore the anxiety of what that could mean. And I'm just going to really embrace like that first few moments of meeting my son. Thankfully, I was given a blood transfusion. I'm here now. Everything is fine. But I think if I didn't have my estate plan and everything, my affairs like fully in order in that moment, I would not have been able to just give him that love in that moment. I would have been thinking in my head, oh my God, what's going to happen to him? But I didn't have to worry about that. So I think if you're expecting a child, get the estate plan done before you go into labor, and you will go in with peace of mind. At least I did.
So you went from, corporate to now doing your own thing. So what led you to starting the firm?
Well, I always wanted to start my own law firm. I actually was going through some old files on my external drive, and I had a document dated 2017 that said, I'm starting a law firm. And it had bullet points of like what I want the law firm to have. And I'm like, wow, that was like before I was even a licensed attorney, and I already knew I wanted to start my firm. And some people do that straight out of law school. I wanted to make sure I got the mentorship and the guidance for a solid amount of time with experienced lawyers first. And I felt like it would give me more credibility as well when I was finally out on my own. So I went into big law knowing that I had an exit strategy in mind. And it's not a typical big law exit. I would say, at least in DC, the typical big law exit is in-house counsel, federal government work. Or you just go into another firm, you know, but like a full-on big law exit is typically those two paths. Some people do go off on their own, but it's definitely the road least traveled.
So you had the vision back in 2017. Well, you wrote it before then, or was it you wrote it in 2017?
I wrote it in 2017 that I was going to start my own firm. I started it in 2025 at the very beginning. That's when I incorporated. So like the ideas were already, I already knew it was going to go down, and I didn't actually pull the trigger until 2025.
Right. How's it been? Like now that you made that transition, how's it been running your business, and talk us through like that experience?
I would say I was the least prepared to handle the business side. I spent the 6.5 years in big law really focused on the lawyering side and the networking side, which is part of the business side. But there is so much more on the business side that I've been learning this year, and that's been like the number one like learning curve is like learning the business side.
Yes.
So I wish I had been more prepared for the business side of the firm, which makes logical sense now that I'm saying it out loud. Like, of course, you're starting a business. You need to know about business. But in my mind, it's like, I'm starting a law firm, so I need to know how to be the best lawyer. And so I wish I had done more of the business planning.
Talk us through some of the challenges day to day. I mean, you know, when we were preparing for the podcast, you talked about being a single mom, running a business, trying to meet new clients, network. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so at this point, you are a unicorn. Okay, you're a superwoman. So tell us through some of the struggles and challenges, and how do you typically fight through them, and making sure that you're still able to be the best mom possible, but also be the best business owner and the best lawyer for your clients?
At the outset, I said my priority is going to be as present as I can with my son, and also give the business the time it deserves. And what I found the best way to do that for me was when I'm home, I'm not working. And when I'm in the business, I'm making sure that it's worth the time that I'm away from my son, and I'm you know, bringing in the business. My priority is not just to bring in the most business I can.
Exactly.
It's to make sure I'm providing for my family and having quality time with my son, because that's the whole point of making enough money for my family, is that I can enjoy the time with him.
Exactly.
So that is a balance, and it is, you know, hard when there's an amazing event that I hear about that I know, like, gosh, I would get so many good, you know, connections there, but it's like, I'm going to have to say no.
Right.
You know, and like maybe once a month or once in a while, I'll be like, you know what? Like, for example, I was recently featured in DC Modern Luxury magazine as a dynamic woman of DC.
Love that.
And they were doing a special dinner for all the women who were honored. It was like a launch for the issue. And I'm like, you know what? I really want to go to that dinner. That's like a once, you know, in a lifetime kind of thing where you're going to get picked to be published in this magazine. So that night I said, okay, I got my cousin to come and stay with him for the night. And I went out to the dinner. So, I mean, I definitely, it's not like all or nothing,
right,
but it is like a prioritization and like value driven decisions.
When I'm doing review meetings, you know, when I'm running the firm, people might say, yeah, Anthony, I got invited to be a godparent. Now, from my perspective, I think people sometimes take that lightly, where they think, okay, if I'm a godparent, you know, I just step in for the good times and the fun times.
Right.
But then what happens when things hit the fan? What happens to the parents? So let's talk about, can you shed some light on that? Like when it comes to being a godparent, what does that really mean? And then how can people ensure that they can accept that responsibility, but know all of the things that come along with it?
If someone has been invited to be a godparent, that can mean a few different things. It could just mean they had a conversation with the parents, or it could mean that there was actually a guardian election signed and notarized and witnessed by the parents that say, if anything happens to me, these are the people who I would want to raise my children. So if we're talking about the actual legal document, That's where I'm going to start. If you are named as a guardian and something happens to those parents, you immediately need to request custody of those children.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, so I'll talk about DC specifically. In DC, if you're not the natural parent, adoptive parent, you have to have physical custody of the children when you're requesting custody in front of the court, like when you're actually asking a judge for custody, because you don't have what's called standing. You could be a stranger just coming off the street saying, hey, I want to raise those kids. And a court doesn't allow that. You have to have a reason why you're coming forward. And namely, it's, well, I am already caring for the kids. And in addition, I was named as a guardian in this estate plan. And now, why is that important? Because maybe someone who isn't named as the guardian wants to come in. Maybe, grandma and grandpa are like, but we love our grandkids and we want to be the ones to raise them. But the parents had a reason for choosing those godparents, right? Maybe they want the child to stay in their neighborhood so they can go to their school. And so they pick somebody local, right? Maybe grandma and grandpa live in Florida or some other state and they don't want to disrupt their kids' lifestyle, right? Or maybe they say, well, what if grandma and grandpa then die? Now the kids have been moved from one home to another. So they chose somebody young for a reason, right? So it might surprise you to learn, but yeah, sometimes family members come out of the woodwork, very well intentioned. And so now there's a fight as to where are the kids going to go. So if you know that you are the named guardian and the parents wanted you to do it, go and get the kids immediately and get a family law lawyer and file for custody as soon as possible. Also, you need to have a relationship with those children now. Hopefully it will never happen that you need to care for them, right? Hopefully they live with their parents and that's great. But if you do need to step in, can you imagine how strange that would be for the child? They just lost their parents and now they're moving in with someone that they don't really know. So you need to make sure that you have that relationship with the children. I mean, it may be appropriate to let the children know if they're ready for that. Like, hey, if anything happens to us, you're going to go with Uncle so-and-so and Aunt that. But maybe you don't want to tell children that because you don't want to even, plant the seed, which is fine. But at least have the relationship with the children. So, and that's not legal advice. That's just, something, that I think would make sense. So have the relationship with the children and know exactly what's required in your state to actually go to court and get custody. Because even though you're named as the guardian, that's not a guarantee the judge is going to give you custody. That is a recommendation that the parents make and the judges take that into strong consideration, but it's not a guarantee. The judge ultimately has to make the decision.
Just even listening to you talk about the scenarios, it can get real complex real fast, which is why it's important to get the estate plan in place, keep it updated, and have a good process in place for that. And so I like it because, it sounds cool to say I'm the godparent, but what does that really mean, right? Yeah. And let's make sure if we are the godparent, how do we step by step ensure that what the parent that created that estate plan is able to actually have their wishes come through? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on these DIY platforms, such as LegalZoom, Trust and Will, because they are significantly cheaper, obviously, than working with a professional. Yeah. And so help me think through, why should someone go with a licensed professional, a human being, versus doing a DIY service online or some nature? Well,
I'll start by saying that those can be great resources for people who really cannot afford to hire an actual, estate planning attorney who's going to make them a custom plan. So if that is really the only option for you, I would advocate in favor of using them. I don't have anything against them whatsoever. I would say if you are in a position to hire an attorney, the benefit to it is that you're going to get a custom estate plan for your particular family situation. So the customization is the number one thing that you're paying for. And obviously, second, if you are in a situation where your estate is going to trigger an estate tax, then you should absolutely get an actual lawyer to help you decide what the structure of your estate plan is going to be. In some states, you trigger that with assets as low as $1 million. In some states, they don't have one. And so it's just the federal tax, which is over $14 million. So it's a really big range and you have to see what's that trigger in your particular state. So one thing that I will say that's great about having an actual estate planning lawyer, in addition to being able to customize your plan. And by customize your plan, I mean, like, say that my kids are in their teens and I already know that one of my kids has an addiction issue, right? Unfortunately, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. I don't want to leave them or have in my plan any kind of situation where they have control over that money. I want to make sure that a completely separate person is administering that money, maybe just paying for their bills and not leaving them with any cash that I know is going to get spent on drugs or whatever. And then maybe I have another child who is very responsible, and I know, like, okay, this child will be able to handle receiving a lump sum of money when they're 25, when they're 30. So I'm going to make a plan that says, if I pass, my child with the addiction issue is going to have a trust administered by someone forever. And my child who is very responsible, will get it in chunks and then the full amount by the time they're 30 or whatever amount. So those are kind of the things that you can't do when you're just filling out like a legal form that's not customizable. Like I, for example, will have a family meeting. So after the estate plan is done, I'm going to get that guardian on a Zoom call. I'm going to get those successor trustees and I'm going to tell them, hey, you're named in this plan. If there's an emergency and these parents are incapacitated, you're up. And here's what you need to do. And if they forget what they need to do during that conversation, they have my phone number, they know who I am. They can pick up the phone and say, hey, there was an accident, I'm up. What am I supposed to do? And I can guide them through that, which is kind of the whole point of getting your estate plan, is that it's for emergencies, at least while you're young. So I think that's just like a huge benefit to just have that relationship so that you can pick up the phone and get the help that you need, at least for your successor trustees and your named guardians.
And thanks for walking through stories, because just listening to you talk, I'm just thinking about these situations in my head. I'm just like, oh my God, there's so many things that need to happen, which is why it's important for people to get a good plan in place with the right team, right? And I think for me, from personal experience, when I started my estate plan, I paid the attorney all up front.
It's typically a flat fee that you pay up front.
Yeah. And then she sent me a bunch of documents, and then I probably didn't get to the documents until like 3 months later. But I think that when you hire a professional, you have someone that can work with you through these documents rather than pay a fee, DIY it, because then you might be stumped on a question that you were asked, but not have the context on how to really think about the question to give the right answers. So I think customization, having a professional be involved, and also just that relationship. Who will they call at the end of the day? Because calling a 1-800 number is not fun, especially when we're in dire situations where people need to be taken care of. We need to take swift action.
And I'll add, you reminded me that you might not actually do it correctly. So like you said, you did it with the lawyer, but then you sat on the documents for a few months. So that's one thing, is that when you do a trust-based plan, you're essentially creating a new legal entity that owns your things, and you still control and benefit from your things. But the only way the plan works is if you actually retitle all of your assets into the name of the trust. It's almost like saying, I'm leaving this storage unit to my heirs, and whoever has the key gets to access everything in it. And then they get to the storage unit and it's completely empty. It's useless. So being able to fully fund the plan, and most estate planning lawyers, the funding will either be included or will be available for an additional cost. And that is like a crucial step. Essentially, your plan will not work. Trust-based plans will not work if they're not funded. And I don't know if that's clear I haven't actually used the online platforms myself, so I don't know how clear they make it that you need to do the funding. But even the funding can be difficult for people, creating a new deed for their house and like changing the name of your bank account. It's a little bit more complicated for when you're putting things into a trust.
Yeah, it's not just, hey, I create the trust, cool, because then people will sometimes create these trusts. And again, from my perspective, on the planning side, people will they won't fund the trust. They won't change they won't change the titling of their accounts to the trust. And so it's like these small mistakes that can really make a huge impact later on. So we're essentially wrapping up here. And so, just being a guest here on the Visionary Network podcast, if we were to meet again today, if we were to meet, let's say 10 years from today, what's your vision for your practice, your life? Love to just hear you kind of dream out loud, and maybe in 10 years we'll look at it again. This is how you did in 2017, right? So let's put it out there in the universe. So what's the vision 10 plus years from today for you and your family?
So I practice in DC, and my vision is that I am the go-to attorney in DC. Anytime someone is expecting a child, they get, baby checklist to-dos. You got to do your registry. You got to do your check-ins with your OB. You got to go to see Shirley Diaz and get your estate plan done. So my goal is to break into the birthing network and the, first-time parent network and be part of that checklist. and be the go-to person to make trust fund babies in DC.
So for anyone that wants to learn more about your work or get in touch, where's the best way to find, where can we find you online?
So my personal Instagram is at Shirdiz, Shirdiz. And if you Google my firm name, Diaz Vidales, I'm the only firm with that name. So you will see me, you'll see my website, you'll see all of our socials, LinkedIn, and you can go ahead and book a consultation.
I love that. I love that. So Shirley, thanks for joining me. And thanks for everyone for listening for today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, share this with your colleague, friend, or loved one. Most importantly, without a vision, there is no plan.